Everyone. My name is Patrice. I am we can keep this. Okay, so the truth is that we've been trying to record this shit for 45 minutes and here we are. So Patrice, founder of Creative Genius Law. We are a business, new media, and intellectual property law firm for creatives. And my good girlfriend Janaea over here is getting me into some good trouble on a Thursday night. So Janaea, why don't you tell the people who you are?
Oh my gosh. Praise God. Yes. Yes. Let's just give a moment of silence. Cause honey child. Woo. Okay, so my name's Janaea Griffin, as my name says over here. You can follow me on all social platforms. I am the commercializer. I'm also a serial entrepreneur, intellectual property advocate, and generational wealth advocate as well. So me and Patrice go together like
I cannot. Y'all, because Janaea wanted to make sure this was like pure perfection, we're going to be interrupted in a few minutes when my tacos arrive. So no judgment, but we will have a great conversation.
Okay, we want you to sit down. If you got some wine, honey, I don't drink, but I will live vicariously.
And there it is.
So yeah, this is what we're doing. This is Patrice got swindled into a show. Okay.
Yeah.
I told her it was going to be a podcast, and here we are. We are talking about what the terms say in any type of contract that you're talking about, any type of contest, privacy policies. What does the fine print say before you go taking those shiny objects, that money, those good benefits, right? The stock options. Yeah. What do the terms say? What does my ownership look like? What does my termination clause look like? What am I actually agreeing to? What are my roles and responsibilities, right? Is this a partnership or, am I a work for hire? Am I having to assign all of my ownership rights over to you? So we've really been seeing a lot of different things just going on in the media. Obviously, as you can see, scrolling across the bottom, we're going to be talking about Cannon and Viacom, as that's the kind of like most recent thing that everybody has been up in arms about. But we've been doing this, okay? Yeah. We did it with Spotify when Spotify came out with their Sound Up Boot Camp, and we'll probably get into that to kind of like go back in the past with one of the articles that we did, but you can find it online. Don't let Spotify monetize your Black girl magic. Yeah. There's plenty more companies who have just recently started to do the same thing. The fine print is really buried and you don't necessarily understand what you're getting into.
And this is where we have to
that was yours and then mine, Mark, too.
This is where we have to pause for me to get the tacos.
Food break. Food break. So we're gonna pause and we're gonna wait for Patrice to come back. Yay, we getting food. Y'all just don't know. Like, this has been we're in tech, right? So this has been like the most craziest things. Like, tech is supposed to be make your life so much easier. And
okay. So let's get to it. So I wanted to, Janaea, kind of share a little bit about like what we're going to talk about and what the terms say mean for us. But I also think it's important to highlight that this is not a new issue. Like, we have seen time and time again how Black folks in particular, it happens to, I would argue probably everybody, but disproportionately for Black people, get into these contract situations where they look up and the management deal wasn't what they thought, or they look up and the agreements they signed when they were hired by whatever corporation, fill in the blank, wasn't what they thought. And so this is not a new issue, but I think it's in the spotlight now, number one, because we have the gift of social media, which allows for more transparency around it. We have people sharing more vocally and publicly around what's happening to them, including celebrities like Nick Cannon, whereas before people may have just kind of whispered what was going on to their friends. We have people who are being bold and who are like, this ain't right, this is what happened. And so it creates a beautiful opportunity for us to have a conversation about it around tacos on a Thursday night. So
girl, pass me those tacos.
Yeah. I'm not sharing. I got 3. I should have got 6. I was trying to be cute. So let's go ahead and dig into this particular topic, which is around what happened with Nick Cannon being let go from Viacom. So just to like quickly recap, we know that Nick Cannon was fired from Viacom because of some comments that he made on his own platform. Mm-hmm. And so we're not necessarily here to get into like the nitty gritty of that, whether that firing should have happened or not. But when that happened, one of the next things that hit the headlines was that Nick Cannon was basically like, Viacom, give me my shit. Give me my shit, right? You're going to let me go, give me my shit.
Give me.
Yeah. And by shit, he was referring to Wilding Out, which he says he created, the show. And so that sparked a conversation between us, and I'll let you pick up from here. What did that conversation look like?
Woo, well, we were kind of on the same page already, and it's always like, sis, did you see this? Girl, did you see this? Hold on, I just tried to fill this out. And so obviously with Nick Cannon having so much celebrity star power, it's all over social media. It's on every Instagram feed, like Twitter. Everybody is up in arms about this. There's hashtags and articles going crazy. And so I think it was more so like, okay, well, what did the terms actually say? Like, that's what everybody, well, from our standpoint is like, because there was one thing in the article where he said like he felt swindled. And so we're like, okay, well, if you feel swindled, the first thing we're going to say is like, well, check your contract. What did you sign? What did you agree to? Regardless if, you may have said something and agreed to it in a verbal form, it really always comes down to those details. So, just in kind of like looking at, maybe what some of those agreements were. I know we couldn't actually get a hold of the contract, but looking at maybe how Viacom actually, manages its intellectual property. And a lot of this information is public information, right? You just have to do the digging. But thankfully we have Miss Creative Esquire. And so for us, it's more so like, hey, what can we do to really highlight the issues that Black people are facing when they are going into these boardrooms or doing these handshake deals with their friends or people that they are putting all of their trust in, and making sure that they're protecting themselves, making sure that they don't feel swindled, making sure that, it's a win for everyone. And if you're entering into those terms, it's because you wanted to enter into those terms, not because you thought something else happened or something was going to happen differently down the way. That's why it's so important to learn, the lingo, to learn the language, and to really understand. And if you don't know, get a lawyer. Creative Esquire, shameless plug. Call an attorney and really just ask about the legalities of what you're about to enter into. Or if you want to make sure, if you have 2 friends and you're like, hey, I just want to make sure that we're doing this fairly and I don't want to ruin our friendship. So I'm going to bring a third party in and make sure that it's fair on both sides. Right. Yeah. And so these are a lot of different things that I feel like we don't necessarily talk about, and it's more so taboo within Black culture, because it's like, oh, you don't trust me, or I'm not signing that. I don't know what that is, like I'm not trying to read that. And so really it is for your protection, and it is for you to actually save your friendships and your relationships, because you can put down what your expectations are, and then you don't feel swindled. So that's really what this is about. Go ahead, boo. I know I've been.
And I think, you hinted at it, but part of it is about empowerment as well. Regardless of what a contract says, you never want to look back and feel like you were swindled. And even if, let's just say, you signed a contract. So obviously in this situation, Nick Cannon does not own Wild 'N Out, and we're going to get into that, right? But let's just say he didn't own it, but that was a choice that he made in the beginning. He was fully aware of the contract. And for him, maybe giving up ownership was worth some other things that he would get in the long run. I'm not saying whether it would have been right or wrong. I'm saying that there is empowerment in being informed enough to make a choice that is right for you. And so that's what we're talking about, where a lot of people don't even really understand the fine print. And so you're not able to enter business opportunities from a position of empowerment. And then too many people are ending up on the back end feeling like they were swindled. And that could be, maybe there was no attorney involved. Maybe there was an attorney involved who didn't really take the time with you to explain some of that fine print. That happens as well. And so that's why we want to have these conversations, because regardless of, the reality is that some people may not be in a position to hire legal counsel right now. And so we recognize that. And so that's why we want to have these conversations, because even if you're not, at least by listening or watching us on What the Terms Say, since Janaea swindled me into a show and not a podcast, you will start to absorb some of what we're going to share over time. So you talked about some of this information being public and available to people. And so one of the things that we did when we were trying to dig around to see if we could actually get a hold of the contract, and we couldn't, was take a look at Viacom's just annual filings. And one of the things that they say in their annual report, and this is verbatim, is the success of our business depends in part on our ability to maintain and monetize our intellectual property rights in our entertainment content. And I think that's important, because at the end of the day, they are an IP company. They are owners of intellectual property and of content. And so for any talent who is looking to work with a network like Viacom, you have to approach it from that perspective. That is their interest. And so when you are at the table, your responsibility, or your team's responsibility, is to look out for your interests. That is not their responsibility to do. They have a business interest in building an intellectual property company. And so you have to decide if ultimately, is that a relationship that is a good fit for you? It might be, it might not be. So we've been kind of seeing some questions floating around, or some discussion around Nick on the web, and we wanted to take the time to address it during this episode. So should we go ahead and dig in?
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah. So the first thing was, people were basically like, WTF, like, how is Viacom able to fire Nick from a show that he created? Right? Which is a very fair question. And so I'll go ahead and just kind of piggyback off of what I just said, is that media companies are in the business of creating intellectual property. And so the way that they were able to fire him is because when you are an employee of a company, and well, there's a couple of different things, because I don't want to draw a ton of assumptions either. 9 times out of 10, when you are hired at a company, anything that you create is going to be a work for hire. And the limitation is that anything that you create that is within the scope of your employment is typically going to be a work for hire. The nuances of the law are going to differ by state, but that's the general rule. And so if you are an employee of a company and you bring a really cool concept to them, and that concept is within the scope of what you were hired to do, then 9 times out of 10, everything that kind of evolves from that concept is going to be owned by that employer. That is how it works. Now, in Nick's situation, I actually don't know that he pitched the concept to them right first before he was an employee. So if he pitched it to them, then that means before he was an employee, right? What that means is that as a part of their, it by default, it was not necessarily a work for hire, but there was something in that contract that gave them full rights to ownership of the show. So they had work for hire language in the contract. Mm-hmm. And so that is why he's in a position where he's been fired, own the show, and they own the, that's okay. I had to get up and get tacos. So, you know, whatever. Anything goes. So, you know, so that's pretty much how and why that happened.
Yeah, and then just to add to that, I think what she's saying is really important in really understanding how you want to position yourself. Are you okay with being an employee? Are you okay with being a contractor, which is a work for hire, and all of the terms that come with being a work for hire, right? No benefits, no they not taking no taxes out of your check, you know, all of these different things, maybe even having to assign over any type of intellectual property rights. There are some language that even says anything that you come up with, even if you jointly create it with them, you still have to give it all over to them. So I think really just understanding like what's the end game for you, right? You don't want to get into one of those contracts where it's real bad. Death row contract. You don't want to get into that, right? Or what we perceive, right, as a death row contract. And so I think just in really understanding that and knowing like the strategy before you get there, and going back to what she said, this could have been what Nick wanted, right? He may have wanted to do work for hire, or he may have said, you know what? In the long run or long term, they're going to give me more work. They're going to give me more shows. They're going to give me more money because they're going to invest more into what I'm wanting to do. And so I'm willing to give up this small piece. Now, we don't necessarily know what the language actually or what the terms actually said. And so that's probably where, you know, he could have felt a little bit swindled. Like, hey, I agreed to sign this contract in lieu of later on reaping more benefits or getting more investments or getting some type of ownership of my show, and I'm still waiting for that ownership, right? So all of these things, I mean, these are all assumptions. Don't take them, you know, as like, oh, well, Janae and Patrice said X, Y, and Z. So these are just some of the scenarios that could have taken place. And so we're just trying to shed light on all of those different scenarios so that you can see how things actually take shape within these boardrooms when these contracts are put on the table, and maybe sometimes what goes into thought wise into like why somebody would sign a contract, such as, you know, one where they give up all their ownership in the beginning. So just thinking about it from that regard, and then also looking at it from like, hey, is this if you have a show that you feel is more valuable, right? And you're willing to say like, hey, I'm going to give you this little rinky dink show that I haven't really spent too much time on, but I know it's going to get my foot in the door because later on, when I give you this other show, I'm going to want a lot more over here, but you want to get your foot in the door. So these are all things that happen. It happens every single day. Just kind of remember how you are positioning yourself. Consider, you know, what the good and the bad, right? And do what feels right for you. Yeah,
exactly. That's the key. There's no one size fits all answer. for how to handle every kind of business opportunity. And so again, these are just things for the different scenarios are important for you to know what's on the table, so that you can kind of dig in deeper and make a decision that's best for you. So just to kind of wrap up that first question around how is Viacom able to fire Nick from the show that he's a creator of, the other thing I wanted to point out is that anything that you are creating that is your intellectual property is a property outside of the creator, right? And so his employment was not contingent upon what happened with the property. So he created this property, the company owns the property, Nick can come or go, that property is kind of a separate creation. And so that's another thing to keep in mind. And that's why he's able to be fired, or they're able to fire him and then still keep ownership of the property. Obviously, their contract says so, but those are two different entities. So work for hire is a phrase that people, throw around pretty easily. And so one thing, or I would say pretty frequently. And so one thing I want to point out for the people is that when you sign a work for hire, what that means is that whoever you're signing it with, so in this example, Viacom, what that means is that Viacom by law is now considered the owner, the creator of that work, right? So they're almost like substituted in your shoes as the creator. So all of the rights that you might have had as the creator, which we can get into in detail at another time because we're going to do this frequently, all of those rights are now Viacom's rights. And so I just want to point that out to people. So what else did we hear on the streets? We heard.
Is there a likelihood that he will get his ownership? Because that was one thing he was like, I'm calling y'all out and I want, I'm coming for it all.
Yeah.
And so how likely is he to actually, get that ownership that he's requesting? I would definitely go back to like, what did the terms say? Like, that's right. Exactly what you're going to have to go. But now, if there's any way that he can maybe void out the contract, or, prove that, he maybe was under duress when he said, I don't know.
Right. And the answer is probably going to be no. Why? Yeah. Because one of the reasons is going to go to one of my favorite words, which is leverage. One of my favorite words when it comes to negotiating, which is leverage. So before he entered that deal, leverage is basically like who has the power at any given time in negotiations. And so when he came up with that concept for Wild 'N Out, maybe he had a lot of power that he didn't realize he had, or maybe he did, right? But for me, the power would have been fairly fresh talent, innovative concept, never been done before. And so to me, that's part of the leverage. And so how do I use that leverage to my advantage when I'm negotiating this opportunity? Now on the back end, his leverage is a lot less than what it would have been before, because now he is a former employee. There may be some there's some public contention around what he said or didn't say, or whether it was wrong or not. And so his leverage in the eyes of Viacom is not as great as it was in the beginning. And so when you're in a position of negotiating and your leverage has been diminished, then the chances of you getting what you want at this point is slim to none, because they do not have a contractual obligation, from what we know, to give him any ownership, right? If it was a work for hire, there is no contractual obligation. Sure, duress, is something that he can claim, but that's not likely to happen in this scenario. So the answer to that is that we don't think he would get his ownership back unless Viacom just decided they wanted to do so for some reason, right? But they're not legally obligated, based on what we know, to give him ownership back. So
I'm rooting for him. I'm rooting for bro. Listen, if there is anything that can be done, I am hopeful that he finds it, because people do this all the time and you wonder like how did they even get back, whatever it was? You knew somebody in some high places. You used your leverage, right? To maybe like stiff arm them or something. I don't know. But I'm hoping that he does get, everything that he wants, because intellectual property, and I know we kind of didn't cover this. So just a really quick, like, what is his intellectual property, right? His ideas, his likeness, right? This is all his intellectual property. And what he did was he protected it. So he probably, I don't even know if he did that or not, right? And so this is really great, because what should he have done beforehand, before he actually went in and wanted to maybe like pitch these ideas or different things like that, so that he could have retained his ownership? So two things from my standpoint is that, hey, he could have negotiated differently, like saying like, hey, I want ownership up front, made sure that the term said he owned a certain percentage, X, Y, and Z, right? He could have done that. The other thing that he could have done was actually protected the intellectual property by getting a trademark, or getting in this case, it's a show, so a copyright. He could have trademarked Wild 'N Out, the name. And I don't know if there were any other ideas or shows that he gave them, but any type of idea, or branding or whatever that you do, always protect that intellectual asset. And that's how you basically come up with intellectual property. It is an intellectual asset. You protect it by either trademark, copyright, patent, or trade secret, and then it becomes intellectual property. And so with that property, now you have ownership, right? And so with that ownership, you get to dictate what can and cannot be done with it. If you go to Viacom, let's just say, and you're like, hey, I have this piece of IP, I want to pitch it to you, but I will license it to you so that I can retain my ownership, right? I'll exclusively license it to you for a certain period of time, to where no one else will get it, but you're going to pay me for it, right? And so he could have held on to his ownership in that regard, but I'm not sure that he actually did that. So that's just another scenario, another way. And I'm sure Patrice got some more gems she could throw out there.
So I'm gonna take an alternate stance on that, because what would have happened if he had done all of that is that he would have got to Viacom and they would have said, oh, great, you have your registrations, that's lovely, as a part of this deal you assign it all over to us. That's just how it's going to work, right? And what I want to say to that is a couple of things. So how could he have negotiated if that was their stance and they said, this is our precedent, this is just how we do business, and I believe that to be true, then how could he have negotiated this particular opportunity in a way that was more favorable to him? So that's the first thing I want to address. The second thing is there are other options, right? Because we know from Michaela, for example, creator of I May Destroy You, that she turned down the Netflix opportunity because Netflix wouldn't budge on the ownership issue, but BBC did. And what she entered ultimately became a joint deal between BBC and HBO. And that was because of the ownership issue. So it may be that a particular network is just not the right fit because they have such a firm stance on ownership. It may be that they have a firm stance on ownership, but you see the long-term benefits. So here's what I think could have happened that might have benefited Nick in the long run. What could have happened might have been, fine, y'all don't budge on the ownership. But what I want is for this deal to be conditioned on me being the host of the show. So if I'm separated from the network for any reason, then you owning this property and being able to do future seasons on the show is contingent on me having the position of host. Because remember, the property is separate from him as an individual. Right. So he might have been able to use his celebrity and his personality and what we love about Nick as the leverage there and said, fine, but it's conditioned on me being the host, right? And again, we don't know if he didn't, But if they continue with Wild and Out without Nick, we'll have our answer, right? So that's the first thing. Other thing he could have done might have been some sort of buyback or reversion where, okay, you have ownership of it, but for some reason I am separated from the company. I have the option to buy you out, to buy this back, right? And so then he would have negotiated what that buyback right might have been. So again, we don't know. And maybe that could be what maybe that's what he's referring to when he said, "Give me my shit back." We don't really know. I mean, you know what I'm saying? And that actually could have been pretty savvy, because think about how wealthy Nick of today is versus Nick of when he first entered that deal.
Right.
And so he absolutely might have been in a position today to buy back that property and then go take it to his own network or someone else's network. And then that leads me to, if he had that buyback, right, then of course he needs some leniency around not competing, because he needs to be able to go take back that property and then license it to another network or use it on his own network. And so those are some ways that I think that if we are in a situation where the network or whoever the other person is just like, no, this is how we do business, this is what it is, and you really want that opportunity, how do you navigate that opportunity in a way that doesn't leave you with feeling like you've been swindled, and that allows you to build that foundation towards building your generational wealth, which is ultimately what's most important to the both of us, right?
And then to just even add on top of that, like the lady that you just mentioned, Mikhail, she was willing to walk away. Yeah. Right. I think that's really important for you to know, like, okay, these are my non-negotiables, and this is what I'm willing to budge on. Now, if you walk into that boardroom and you're like, these are my terms, okay, and they're like, no, we can't do X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z are your non-negotiables. Are you gonna walk away? Or are you going to feel like they took advantage of you? Or you're going to be like, you know what? I just really need this right now. And so you did it. But at the end of the day, like, you also have to realize your worth. And that's exactly what she did. She said, oh, you're not going to give me this? I'm out. Because there's so many other networks and so many other ways that I can actually get this out, and they're going to give me what I want because of A, either who I am, or B, because this intellectual property that I do have is so amazing and they really want it. Like, you don't always have to bend to their terms. And so just understand that you have to walk in there knowing what you're willing to give up and what you're willing to fight for. And if you're not willing to walk away for something, then maybe you need to really look at the value of what that is to you and really weigh that out. Because if it's something that you created, it is extremely valuable. That is how the wealth has been generated for this entire country forever. So, I think we have to really start to value our intellectual property, which is ultimately ourselves at the end of the day. Like I said, our likeness, our ideas, our thoughts. We have to learn how to value that and place that above what other people may deem or may deem what it is. And I think that sometimes that's what we do. We walk into this boardroom and we're like, oh, well, thank you for this opportunity of being here. Versus like, I'm supposed to be in this boardroom. I'm grateful that you allowed me to come in and to share this opportunity and to share in this opportunity with me, because it is an opportunity for you to work with me just as much as it is an opportunity for me to work with you. And I think we have to get out of that mindset too, that like, we're not the bag. We are the bag, okay?
Yeah, we are the bag.
Like, these corporations and these brands are changing their marketing and changing their strategy so they can reach a demographic of people that look like us. With our culture. And they want to, like, how do we get Black people to buy more? How do we have a 1.2 or 1.3 trillion dollar spending power from consumer wise. I would actually like to understand how much we have like from an investment standpoint, but just from consumer wise, that's a lot of money. Yeah. And so I think we need to understand the power that we have as Black people.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
And on the culture piece of it, if we think about Wild 'N Out, right? Would this is the 13th year of the show? When was it created? You know?
I have no idea.
2000. Can you look that up real quick?
Let me see. I got you, boo.
Thank you. I think 13 years, but we'll know in a minute for sure. But if we think about the culture piece of it, think about like the cornerstone of Wild 'N Out, right? Like we basically like roasting people. And so
2005
part of our culture, right? We've always done it. Like we've done it in our homes, we've done it with our friends, it's how we connect. Yeah. And so rewind to when Nick would have first pitched that show, right? And think about how like he's basically packaging up like our culture, like a piece of it that we love. And he's presented it in a way where you have these this corporation on the other side, like they might have been familiar with it, they might not have been, but we know that there's never been a mainstream show where folks basically like roast each other, right? And so just think about how ahead of the curve he was. But he was ahead of the curve, number one, because we think he is just a creative genius. But number two, the influence of our culture. And so that's something where a lot of times we, as Janaea said, like we don't place enough value on our own stuff and what we're bringing to the table. And so now, fast forward X amount of years later, you know, it's a multi-million-dollar property for them, I'm sure. And so what year was it created?
2005.
2005. So 15 years later, right? A multi-million-dollar property. And so that's what we mean.
I think billion-dollar. I think
billion-dollar property. Yeah. Yeah. And we don't know for sure, but it's up there, right? Because it's one of their top properties, I believe. And so when we are talking about the importance of negotiating and knowing what the terms say and recognizing your value, don't just think about today. Think about 15 years later, because these last 15 years have flown by for me. I don't know about you all. And so if we can wrap this up with one tip for our friends out there, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good one. Can you go first? Let me see. What's one tip? I think
that's actually my one tip is whenever you are negotiating an opportunity or you have an opportunity in front of you, for you to, number one, sit and just sit with it, and then really, really reflect on the value that you are bringing to the table and the potential value that you're bringing to the table. Like, don't just focus on today. And so that's my one tip.
My one tip would be to make sure that you read the contract not once, not twice, but 3 times. Okay. And get somebody else to read the contract too, because our eyes might be a little glazed over from the money that's on the table. And so if you could get somebody to read that contract who isn't necessarily involved with the negotiations, or obviously they have to be under NDA or whatever, but just understanding that they don't have a dog in the fight, because you never know, depending on like who your legal is, or and make sure that it's not illegal that they recommended.
Y'all see how she's sitting over there? We said one tip. That's the one tip. You just tried to
one. It just came through me. It ain't me, it's God. But yeah, just make sure that you're reading, that you're going over it, fine tooth comb, going through these contracts. What does this say? And if you don't understand it, make it make sense. What the terms say? What did the terms say? I don't care what you're putting on the table in front of me. I don't care about the benefits, the stock options. I don't care about the money. I don't care about being flued out. I don't care about being on TV. I don't care about any of that. What do the terms say? Okay, because at the end of the day, all of that stuff goes away, and whatever is left is what is in that contract. The language and the terms that dictate what happens, when it happens, how it happens. And I think that is super important, and you making sure that you just understand that you can actually sit there and have a conversation with the people about the responsibilities or about the language that's in there without you having to turn and say like, well, I don't know, legal person, what does this say? Because you never know what type of time they on. But yeah, so that would be my number one tip.
And where can they find us if they want to stay connected?
So you can email us all of your questions. Please send them in to whatthetermssay@gmail.com. Okay, we're new, so we're getting our act together.
We're getting it together.
And on Instagram at wtts.co. So we will be back with more. We're going to be breaking more agreements, more policies down, more terms down, and breaking them down into layman's terms so that you start to understand what it is that you're going into. Even if you don't necessarily have a legal person in the beginning, right? You may get them later on to make sure that you can draw up everything formally, but at least you will be able to be a part of the conversation and know what to say without just initially saying yes, because your eyes is glazed over.
Yeah. And you can also follow each of us individually at Janaea Griffin on Instagram and creative_ESQ. Thank you guys. This was so much fun. And I don't mind being swindled into a show.
Okay. Y'all just know I swindled the Creative Esquire. I'd like to thank my mama and God for downloading this in me and allowing me to swindle her.
Yes. All right. This was fun. You guys, we love to hear from you, and we will see you next time.
All right. Bye.